So the first thing I want to ask you about is the trio touring in Europe. You're just back from that tour.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. Tell us about that.
Oh, well, the trio did the first proper tour of Europe, and it was a lot of fun. We've been planning on it for quite some time, but sometimes it's difficult with schedules, and we're all working musicians, so we all have to work around our other gigs. But we finally got this tour together, and it was almost a month in February, and it was Germany, Poland, Austria, Slovakia, a bunch of other places, and really, really wonderful. You get a sense over there that artistic quality matters. Like hard work, they appreciate hard work and dedication to a craft. It's not that there isn't a presence of like very commercial music that you'll hear here, but they just, I don't know, they seem to have a higher level of arts appreciation over there.
You mentioned that it was a proper tour. Have you been on many improper tours?
Well, I say that because we had gone to the UK before. We did do a short tour. Not that there's nothing improper about the UK, but it was just the UK because of scheduling. We were hoping to hit continental Europe. And we have played in continental Europe, but we did so as the support act for some friends of ours, Rodrigo y Gabriela, who are incredible, and they play multiple nights at some of the biggest venues. We actually played with them at the Olympia in Paris, Shepherd's Bush Empire in London, multiple nights. Dublin. So it was a great tour and very appreciative audiences, but it was almost like it wasn't reality because we're playing, giant places, and the crowds were great. But normally when we play a place, it's more like the Iridium, like we're playing, like we're going to do tonight.
And do you like that? Do you like the intimacy?
I do. I enjoy playing bigger places, and when I play, in other musical genres, specifically, the hard rock side of things, I'll play for large audiences, and sometimes, 1,000 or more people at a time. It's a different experience. I think for instrumental music, I really like having a connection with the crowd, and it's much more easy to achieve that with a small audience.
Mentioned this, I guess, juxtaposition of the large and the small, and it ties into my fascination with you and this juxtaposition of the world of metal that you've been in for such a long, long time with Testament, and this other facet of your playing, this jazz connection. How did that come to be? Why did you decide to complement the way you began with a different musical idiom? What was that about for you?
Well, yeah, I was talking about this recently, and I said, it feels normal to me. I know it's very unusual, so it probably seems very abnormal to people just because it just doesn't happen very often. But to me, it made perfect sense to dive into the jazz side of things when I did. I happened to join a professional band when I was very young. I was 16. So by the time I was 18, I was recording my first album with the band and getting experience as a touring artist. Many friends of mine that are jazz musicians were into hard rock and heavy metal at the same time I was, but they weren't at a professional level yet, and their tastes developed, and maybe by the time and some of these are people you've heard of, maybe by the time you've heard of them, they had really gone to the jazz. They'd gone to the jazz side. But you wouldn't know that they had ever listened to or played heavy metal music. But many of them have. I can name several. There's a drummer that comes to mind, Ari Honig, a guitar player that I knew much later when I went to the new school, named Mike Marino, who's considered like one of the top modern guys, and he had actually been to one of my concerts. So and it happens all the time. But I think because I became known, and it just at such a young age, it was surprising when I sort of developed into this jazz player. But to me, it felt natural, and I bring up these other examples just to show that other people do go on to have that same tract. I just think, in my case, it was a little more. It seems odd because I already had a career, and that first record I made at 18, that was followed with an album a couple years later in Fantasy Studios, and I was making a heavy metal record, but Fantasy had just bought the entire Impulse catalog.
I remember that very well.
Okay, yeah, so they happened to be remastering John Coltrane Live at Birdland, and I heard the open solo, his cadenza, from I Want to Talk About You. It's just him playing. And they're remastering it, so it sounded like he was in the room. And to me, it was the most exciting thing I'd heard since, I'd heard Eddie Van Halen playing Eruption, which is a great piece of music for rock guitar. And that made me want to be a lead guitarist. But suddenly hearing John Coltrane, so up close and personal, even though he wasn't there, it seemed like he was, that had a very similar effect. And around the same time, I had discovered Miles Davis, and he was doing his electric music, and I saw a televised performance. And I didn't know that was jazz necessarily. I heard screaming guitars. It was probably Mike Stern or John Schofield, maybe Robin Ford.
Yeah.
I heard funky bass, ethnic percussion, all this great stuff. And then later, I in an effort to understand that music, I started learning the basics of jazz, and more straight ahead jazz. And then I decided I found out I liked straight ahead jazz. I just had never approached it with in a methodical way before. But the more I did, the more that attracted me, and I loved the elegance of it. And it was a nice contrast to the screaming lead guitar stuff that I'd been doing.
speaking to a dear friend of mine who's a lover and a my guru of opera, but he also loves metal. And we talk often about the storytelling of both. And it seems to me you are in that same place as he described it. You're somehow immersed in the arts because of its heightened awareness as a musician, as a writer, as a storyteller, an activist. It seems to me it all comes down to story. It's all about story. So what are the stories you can tell in one genre that you can't tell in another, or how do they feed on each other?
Very interesting question. I think sometimes it might be the same story, in fact, but just very different ways of telling it. You know, it's a different medium. Basically, you want everybody's attention. You want the audience's attention. It can be harder to get that in a rock and roll setting. Yeah, because people like to talk. They like to have drinks. There's a scene that goes along with it, and they're there to hear high energy music. So you have to deliver, and but perhaps in the court, well, you have their attention if you can sort of become artistic and surprise them and throw them some curveballs. It's a way of communicating something that you couldn't otherwise. When I play with Testament, for example, the guitar solo sex, that's my moment to sort of do something that's interesting and that hopefully you haven't heard somebody else do. I mean, there are many great guitar solos. Some of them have, to me anyway, have a lot of overlap, and I like ones that are surprising. And to me, a source of being able to achieve that is exploring other genres of music. So I can come at it the other way. When you play a gig of acoustic jazz style music, jazz is such a broad term, but let's just say that for the sake of argument. Well, there you have an audience that is listening, and they're there to listen, and there's no mosh pit. They're there to sit and have a drink and listen to what you're playing. So there, in a way, there's more pressure, but there you have to deliver, and you have to tell a story that people are paying close attention. They tend to have more discerning ears, and that's it's a different type of story, but you can still express the same emotions. And then there are links that tie it all together. Like, to me, a link that ties things together is the blues.
Absolutely.
You can take a great AC/DC record and very easily point to the blues influence. You can do the same thing with a great Miles or Charlie Parker record,
or a Skip James record from the 30s.
Sure.
40s.
And then, of course, then there's Buddy Guy and Muddy Waters and actual blues, which is great too. And I'm actually starting to explore that more in my own music.
Have had the joy of sitting here and talking with many musicians, and one of them recently was a fellow guitarist, Steve Vai,
Oh,
who
yeah.
also studied with Joe Satriani.
Absolutely. I just did the G4 experience,
Okay.
the Joe Satriani G4 experience.
Right.
And it was great because, Vi was there one day. The G4 this year was Satriani, Eric Johnson,
Yeah.
Mike Keneally, and myself. It was like a huge honor. So
We were talking about technique versus storytelling, or not necessarily versus, but how does technique serve story? And I'm wondering what your take is on that. What is happening in your head? How the technique allows you to tell story? It's very easy for people to just get all over the guitar. You can certainly do that. You have chops to spare. How does that serve story for you? Is it about intention or is it about something else?
Well, to me, it's really about honesty, and it's very easy to be dishonest. So to me, and I'm not accusing anybody of that. It's just
I understand.
you can tell when somebody's going through the motions, and sometimes you might need to go through the motions a little bit just to get to your story. But the point being, if a solo is more about technique than the story, it's very obvious to me, and I've caught myself doing it. I realize, okay, I'm playing fast.
I'm playing notes. I'm just playing notes.
Yeah,
I'm playing
right.
notes.
I know there's people here that they want to hear me play fast. So, all right, I'm going to give them what they want. And then the next thing okay, I'm giving these licks, but what am I doing? Like, where am I going with this? I started having these internal conversations.
I have interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people over the years, and I have rarely met someone who seems like they're bursting at the seams, and that's you, man.
Oh, thanks.
You seem like you cannot contain all the ideas and all the thoughts and all the enthusiasm you have about sharing yourself. It's fascinating. It's wonderful.
Oh, thanks. Well, it's, I guess maybe, because these things interest me, I hope others will be interested as well.
You have to come back and talk to me some more next time. Would you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.